This is a double portion this week. The Tazria and the Metzora, the woman who's delivered and the leper. These are very long sections about this kind of stuff and cleansing and leprosy. And in fact, that's why I think in the reading schedule, why the Jews have decided to put these two together, and because just try to get through. Even the Jews are like, we just got to get through this stuff. Come on. And they don't want to do this for 2 weeks, right? In fact, there's only one time that these are ever split up, if my understanding is correct, is that, first of all, you have to have a year that has the 13th month, the second Adar. So you got the 13 months. But it has to be a year where the 13th month has 5 Shabbats that land in that month. And only then, when you have that 5th Shabbat in that year, when they would split this up. And I think that happened last year or two, recently anyway. Where you have the 13th month had 5 Shabbats land in it. But outside of that, which is pretty rare, let's get through this. And so I started diving into it, and this is about leprosy, a big part of it. And the lepers are to be put outside the camp. This is in Leviticus 13:45. But the first slide I have, I think, is when I started looking at leprosy in this topic. I had kind of a side thing that came up that I'm really not going to resolve for you. I'm just going to throw it out there. This is the Matthew 26 slide. So this is out of my NASB, and it says, "Now when Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper." Okay, that's what I'm used to seeing. For some reason, I don't know why, I decided to stumble on and look this up in the A&T. Now, A&T is Roth's. This is Andrew Gable Roth's New Testament from the Aramaic. And it was a big thing a while ago, and people don't talk about it as much anymore. But in his, he says, when she was in Bethania in the house of the potter, I think, turn that blue there. Here he's saying the word in Aramaic he claims is potter and not leper. And so I did a little bit more looking into that on the next slide. Our Devar, which is from the Lamps's Aramaic, also reads leper and not potter, and that's from the Aramaic. I also looked at Etheridge, which also says leper, and I didn't put it on here. But Murdoch, who also translates from the Aramaic, has leper. The only person that has potter is Roth. I don't know enough about Aramaic, and I didn't see anything. And in his A&T, he referred to a page there that I was either too dumb to find or something, and then I got off that subject. But I'm throwing that out there that Roth is the only one that says it's not a leper, it's a potter, and I'm not going to resolve that for you in any way whatsoever. I'm just going to say that I noticed that, but I don't know what's causing that. But Andrew Gable Roth is definitely the only one, even from the Aramaic, that says that. Now, I know, some people have kind of dismissed some of Roth's work in Aramaic, and he definitely has some ideas that we disagree with. Although reading through his A&T, I got to say, the back, almost third of that, is like a 200-page book with a lot of great information, by the way. If you think about it, this is an Aramaic Bible, basically. But no, he could have a whole separate book on all that stuff that's just at the back there. And I've never even read in great deal on a lot of it, but there's probably some pretty good stuff buried in there that if I ever have more time, I'll maybe dig into that some more. So this is leprosy. And in their day, there was a whole host of blemishes that were not necessarily the bad thing that we think about when we hear the word leprosy. And in fact, it could extend to clothing and to mold on houses and such. And then basically that would affect the mortar or the plaster, and there would be rules in there about tearing off the mortar or plaster of your house. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, he's giving this to them when they're out in tents. Nobody has a stone house when he gives this rule. Obviously, he's thinking ahead to the future, presumably. Because, I don't think anybody had stone houses with plaster when this was given. Now we think about leprosy, of course, not in houses and clothing, but people. And the real leprosy that we know today is medical terms, is really called Hansen's disease. And the reason it's called that is because this was a doctor named Hansen that basically discovered that it was a bacteria that was causing this. And it was actually one of the first instances in medical science, I guess, where they started to understand these microbes, these bacteria, the viruses, some of these little, germs that were causing a lot of their illnesses. And this was one of the first ones I think, where that was actually discovered and isolated, the particular bacteria. And this happened in 1873 that he made this discovery. And so I started looking at a little more history on this, and it turns out the first recorded case of this particular type of leprosy is really unknown, partly because we're not sure in ancient documents that they were really describing this particular bacterial infection versus some other skin ailments. And actually, if you read what's described in Scripture as leprosy, there actually is no known ailment of skin ailment actually that matches all of the criteria given there. Okay, but when I was looking at some of the earliest records for this, I stumbled on this particular document that I thought was pretty cool. Again, kind of a sidetrack here. This is a document here is known as the Ebers Papyrus. This document right here that you're looking at is as good shape as it is, came from Thebes in Egypt, dated to 1550 BC. This photo is of the beginning of it, basically a scroll, but they describe it as 110 pages. The scroll itself is 66 feet long, which is probably longer than our Torah, or almost as long as our Torah scroll. These are ancient Egyptian writings containing magical formulas and folk remedies of injuries, incantations meant to cure diseases. There are chapters on contraception, pregnancy, intestinal disease, parasites, skin problems, dentistry, surgical treatments for abscesses, tumors, and setting bones, and even on burns. Now, 1550 BC would put this basically at the time that Israel was in there. They were at Egypt at this time frame. It depends on what time you actually figure the Exodus was. There's debates about it. About as late as 1250 BC, but maybe as early as about 1450 BC. Depends on some archaeology that you do. But either of those, if you back up 400 years, this 1550 BC would be while they were in Egypt. I just find that kind of fascinating that this was written while the Israelites were there in Egypt. Now, in this papyrus, there's no description of any skin ailment that clearly matches what we know as leprosy today, but I just kind of came across it and found it kind of interesting. Again, this document dates, and actually he's already done the zoom in. He zoomed in on it because I just kind of took a screenshot and I zoomed in a little bit closer on the lettering. And let's look at the beauty of these letters. This is just, especially you, like you do this kind of stuff, right? I mean, someone in 1550 BC took some little stylus and ink and did all that. And he did such a good job. I mean, look how straight some of the stuff is. I couldn't do that, even today. Now, I wonder, how is it that something that was done so long ago looks just like it was done yesterday? It's so beautiful, so perfect, and has not been ruined. Now, part of the reason it was not ruined is because it was in a tomb that was untouched until about the 1800s when it was kind of discovered. But I kind of thinking about ancient things like this. I think about the Roman Colosseum. We visited that last year because we did our trip to Italy. And, the grandeur of the Roman Colosseum, right? If you kind of got some models and stuff that'll show you in drawings or pictures. But you go look at it today, right, with earthquakes, men destroying it, weather destroying it. The Roman Colosseum is kind of a ruin of its former self. But when they built the Roman Colosseum, this was as ancient to them as the Colosseum is to us now. It's hard to imagine how old that was. I mean, this was an ancient, of course, they hadn't discovered it yet, but it was there. It was as ancient to them virtually as the Colosseum is to us. It's just... Now, leprosy probably existed at the time that the leprosy as we know it probably existed at the time that this was being written, the scripture and the papyrus probably. And being that it's a bacteria now that we know bacteria do change over time. And this is actually the same with viruses. If you don't know, many learned this during COVID about, viruses change. Well, we learned that during COVID if you didn't know, right? And what happens is they become easier to transmit frequently, but then less deadly, which kind of makes sense, right? The easier to transmit variants we're going to transmit, more easily. The ones that are more deadly, the people die, and so they don't have as much opportunity to transmit it. So it's kind of a natural progression with the variants of these viruses and bacteria. That's kind of a typical path that you see that happens. Now, I've said this before, I don't know how long ago, maybe a year or two ago, about viruses and such. Maybe the last time I preached on this. But there's three things that a virus, or maybe a bacteria, but a virus we think more of. There's three things that a virus really needs to exhibit to be truly catastrophic. And in all of human history, no virus has ever had all three of these traits at the same time. And I think I have a slide on those three traits here. Is that the next one? It needs to be easily communicable, like basically airborne, right? Makes it easy to transmit. It needs to have a very long gestation. That is, that can develop symptoms very slowly, maybe a year or two, let's say. There are some viruses that take a year or two to develop or show themselves. And then at the end of that, it needs to be very deadly. Now see, AIDS, for example, is 2 and 3, right? It takes a long time for that to develop, for the symptoms of that frequently to develop in people. And it can be very deadly, although now there's drugs now. And so you might add a fourth to this, by the way, which is drug resistance. So it has to be drug resistant now, right? And so that, when it came out, when AIDS came out, it was very long gestation, a year or two or several years before people would die. But it killed the vast majority of people that originally got it. But it was not easily communicable, right? It was not through the air. You had to be very close contact, let's say, to really get that one. And so it was missing one of the three. Now, staph infections are becoming more drug resistant, so maybe that could lead to something like this. I also think of Ebola. And Ebola is very easy to transmit. That's one of the problems. Just by breathing. It's in the air. You can't even be close to somebody that's got Ebola. You're likely to get it. And it's very deadly. A great percentage of people that get the Ebola virus will die from it. But it does not have a long gestation. Ebola kills people very quickly. Now imagine an Ebola that had a long gestation period like AIDS. That is, people could be infected with this for years and walking around with no symptoms, but transmitting to everybody just by breathing. That would be a plague of biblical proportions. Nay, I say the Bible has not recorded an apocalypse like that, possibly except for the prediction in Revelation. I could easily see a third of the earth dying of something that exhibited all three of these traits. But again, many viruses, though, do exhibit only 2 of the 3. All it takes is for a virus to pick up the third one, and you kind of wonder, in all the ailments that have happened in mankind for all the time, that why hasn't such a virus developed the third trait? Almost as if Elohim is keeping that from happening for a time, doesn't it? Now, leprosy, going back to leprosy, it rarely kills people directly. It disfigures, but it kills the nerve endings that lead to injuries and infections. So they lose sense of feel is one of the things that happens. And when you get injuries and infections, especially back in the ancient times, you get gangrene, which is almost a death sentence back in the ancient times. Yeah. Left without treatment, lepers can survive for a while, but many would have died after being affected, maybe within about 15 years. But leprosy is not easily transmittable, not airborne. And also, turns out 95% of the people are immune to that bacteria. So 95% of the people that get in close contact with the bacteria won't show any symptoms at all. You're basically immune to it. It's only 5% that have that, or susceptible to that. And it actually still exists in the world today in parts of Africa, Asia, and Central America. Now, we have treatments now with antibiotics. And in Scripture, there are certainly practical issues that they were dealing with. These are whole sections on leprosy, of course, though, have symbolic meanings which points to sin. Leprosy represents sin. If that's true, then the loss of pain represents the callousness that comes from sinning over a long time. As you get used to doing it, so it doesn't seem wrong. You don't feel the pain of sin. And we try to avoid pain because that's actually helpful for us. It keeps us from injuring ourselves further. Similarly, you should feel pain in your spirit when you sin. That's a good thing spiritually. It helps steer you away from things that you should not be doing. But those who have lost that feeling of pain in their spirit when they sin, they'll keep on doing it. They'll keep on sinning. They don't perceive the spiritual pain that they ought to feel over time. So they're hurting themselves spiritually, but they don't realize it. And it can be difficult to get them to perceive that what they're doing is wrong. Because it doesn't feel wrong. They don't think about anything being wrong, and they keep doing it. Which leads to another symbolic connection between leprosy and sin, which is it spreads to others, especially the others that are close by. Now, leprosy, again, is not as contagious as, say, the flu or the cold. It can be spread to others, but it takes close contact over a period of time. And sin works that way frequently. If you're around someone and they behave badly, the first time you notice it, it's easy just to not fall into doing that thing. But if you're with them for a long period of time, that will wear off, right? And it wears on you over time. That's what we call peer pressure, right? Peer pressure can be good, but it seems like most of the time we talk about peer pressure, it's always something bad, right? It's something wrong. And over a long period of time, it's hard to continue to hang around a group of people. They're doing something that you disagree with and not have that affect you. You're eventually going to slip into it a little bit yourself. And so sinning can spread amongst the body spiritually, like leprosy spreads through a group of people. We start to react the way the others around us react, and we don't perceive there's as much anything wrong with that behavior. Our country has started to call many things that are sinful, they call that normal. Our society now doesn't perceive how that's hurting the whole society. Let them do that, let them be the way. No, but that's going to affect the whole society. There's another symbolism between leprosy and sin that comes into play, and that's the treatment of it. A leprous person was to be isolated and put outside the camp. The process to bring them back was not arduous, but it was lengthy. If you look at it, you inspect them for 7 days, and then after 7 days you inspect them again, you wait 7 days, and then they would make some sacrifices. There's 2 birds. One is killed under the water. The second bird gets dipped. Then they sprinkle blood on him. Then they let the living bird go. Then you wait another 7 days. Then they wash and they shave everything, including their eyebrows. Yeah. This might be some of the most detailed and elaborate Levitical directions that are given in the Torah. Yeah. Now, why? Well, for leprosy, we can see the sense of the physical aspect of being assured that has been completely removed from the individual. And that makes sense kind of spiritually as well. For those who have sinned enough to cause a separation, there's a process to come back. But not any one of the steps is really that arduous. As each simple step is accomplished, you can be more assured that there's been a true change in a person, a true spiritual cleansing. But it's natural for people to balk at even simple steps. And we see this in the Haftarah. We didn't read it today, but if you've read your Haftarah for the portion, this is the story of Naaman, who was the leper. Right? Naaman had leprosy, and he wants to be cleansed of it. Well, he hears about Elisha, and so he goes to have Elisha cleanse him, and Elisha tells him to do something very simple. Yeah. And he refuses, and he gets angry. Because Elisha said, go dip yourself 7 times in the Jordan River. And he's like, especially the lower part of the Jordan River, it's all muddy, it's dirty. It's like, we have much better, cleaner rivers where I come from. And he was angered because he was asked to do something simple. But his servant talks some sense into him. He says, so, hey, if the prophet had asked you to do something hard, wouldn't you have done that? Well, yeah. Then why wouldn't you do something simple? It reminds me of keeping the Torah, too, when I talk to the students. Right? We're asking you to do something simple, but they really fight you on that. So dipping yourself in the Yarden is easy. But also, again, it's not just once. It's 7 times. Doing something easy multiple times. There's a simple process, but it is still a process. And it's not just one thing, or it's not one great thing. It's many little steps for reconciliation. And as for being put outside the camp, we see a concept in several places in the Brit Hadashah of the New Testament. I'm going to read the one that you may well have heard from 1 Corinthians. This is chapter 5, starting in verse 9. We should have a slide on that. So I wrote to you in a letter not to associate with an immoral person. I do not mean that you should separate completely from all immoral people of this world, or from the fraudulent, or the extortionists, or from idolaters. Otherwise, you'd be obliged to leave the world. Now what have I written you is for this, that you are not to associate with any person who is known as a brother, and yet is immoral, or fraudulent, or idolater, reviler, or drunkard, or an extortionist. With such a person you must not even break bread. For what business have I to judge those who are outside? But you may judge those who are within. Elohim will judge the outsiders. Therefore, put away from among yourselves those wicked persons. This shows a way to reconcile, and the scripture says not to judge, or you're trying to reconcile the directions to not judge and now be a judge. The best way that I can find to make that work is that to not be a contradiction is I think we're not to judge those who are outside, right? Because they don't know any better. The judgment that you were called to do frequently is for those that are in so-called brothers, or those that are in the kahal. Let's see. Those offenses that are listed, Paul instructs us to put the person out of the congregation and not even to share a meal with them, which seems harsh, but that is like the leper being put out of the camp. Yeshua says something similar to this in Matthew 18. This is the famous Matthew 18 resolution process. It says, Now then, if your brother's at fault with you, go and rebuke him alone. If he listens to you, then you've won your brother. But if he will not listen to you, take one or two with you, because at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word will be established. And if he will not listen to them, then tell it to the congregation. And if he will not listen to the congregation, then regard him as a publican and a servant of idols. Here Yeshua says basically have nothing to do with these kinds of people. And again, like Paul says, these are brothers. That is, those who are inside the congregation. And the purpose of bringing other witnesses for the whole congregation is to establish the truth. And the not listening part implies clearly something that is false and that's serious. Paul gives us a list of those more serious issues. Although the least offensive of those that he lists would seem to be drinking too much or being a reviler. Some translations use slanderer there. Paul's use of this in only 1 Corinthians, let's see, hold on. Wait a minute. Yeah, the word can mean also strife or contention, which seems very plausible. Now, leprosy is a hard thing to get out of the body, and so is sin. It takes a lot of prayer. And on prayer, that is, I've been convicted about my prayer life lately. And part of that is actually kneeling down, which is biblical. And you've seen me do that here, and that's kind of one of the ways I think I've kind of grown in a spiritual sense as you've watched me here at Bat Zion. Now, there are places where churches do kneeling down. If you've ever been to a Catholic church, in my wandering in my faith journey, I spent some time in a Catholic mass, and the ones I went to, and I think most of them do, they have the pews, they got the little bar right there. You put the bar down, you kneel down, okay, and then you stand up, put the bar up. It seems very rote, though, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong. There is scriptural support for kneeling down, and I think there are maybe a few other high church groups that do that. Lutherans, I'm thinking Anglicans. Yeah, there are some also that do something very similar to that. And so I started doing a little more study here on the kneeling down to the bowing down for prayer. And one of those that we read, I know we read it last week in our Siddur. I don't think we read it today, but we read it frequently in our Siddur. This is Tehillah, or Psalms 95:6, and I've got a whole bunch of these. It says, "Come, let us bow down, bend the knee. Let us kneel before Yahweh our Maker." Yeah. And so if I studied this, the rest of these, not from the Devar, but from my NASB, just out of time constraints, the rest of these are from NASB. But in Daniel 6:10, this is one we should know. It says, "Now when Daniel knew the document was signed, he had entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open towards Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously." Now this is one of the reasons we frequently face this way. Why? We're facing Jerusalem, just like Daniel does here. And so this is a great example to follow. And that's what we're doing. And of course, the problem is our building isn't exactly east. We're a little cockeyed. So, in fact, Yehuda is not exactly east. It's probably about right there. It's something a little bit in between, but close enough, right? When we face this way, we're facing Jerusalem. And then when we face this way, we're facing Yeshua. Now, Ezra 9:5 is another one I have, and this is when the temple was rebuilt. It says, but at the evening offering I arose from my humiliation, even with my garments and my robe torn, and I fell on my knees, and I stretched out my hands to the Lord my God. The reason he has his robe torn is because he's seeing some serious sin that Israel is falling into. And so he's basically in the process of mourning. But in that process of grief, he falls down on his knees and stretches his hands to the Lord in praise. Now we see Yeshua doing this too. In fact, we see this many times, almost more times in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. In Luke 22:41, this is Yeshua, and it says, and he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray. Now this is in the Garden of Gethsemane here before he was executed. But again, Yeshua knelt down to pray. Acts 7:60 says, then falling on his knees, he cried out with a loud voice, Lord, do not hold this sin against him. Having said this, he fell asleep. This is the stoning of Stephen. Again, he fell to his knees, not because he was getting hit with stones, but clearly he fell to his knees to pray for them. In Acts 9:40, it says, but Peter sent them all out, and he knelt down, and he prayed. Turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes. And when she saw Peter, she sat up. This is where Peter raises this girl from the dead. It says he got down, he knelt down to pray. And I wonder, what would have happened if he had not knelt down? Did he need to kneel down? But he did it anyway. In Acts 21:5, it says, when our days there were ended, we left and started our own journey, while they all, with their wives and children, escorted us until we were out of the city. After kneeling down on the beach and praying, we said farewell to one another. I like this. They're out on the beach. And so this is where they were. All right, I like this because it's not a super special place or not a super special time. Obviously, it's important to them because they were departing. But they knelt down on the beach and they prayed. Romans 14:11, for it is written, as I live, says the Lord, every knee shall bow to me, and every tongue shall give praise to God. Well, that almost sounds like it's a future thing, but why not do that now? Why not bow the knee to the Lord? Isaiah 45:23, it says, I have sworn by myself that the word is gone forth from my mouth in righteousness, and I will not turn back, that to me every knee will bow, and every tongue will swear allegiance. Of course, this is bowing to the Lord. Isaiah 49:7, thus says the Lord, the Redeemer of Israel, its Holy One, to the despised one, to the one abhorred by the nations, to the servant of rulers, kings will see and arise, princes will bow down, because the Lord, who is faithful, and the Holy One of Israel has chosen you. And there are many others that you could choose from. I'm going to cut it off here and do this last one. This is Ephesians 3, starting in verse 14. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father. What reason? He tells you. From whom every family in heaven and earth desires his name, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in the inner man, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, and that you be rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints, that is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled up to all the fullness of God. Amen. Now, We like our Messianic Jewish teachings around here. We like some of the symbolism that we see. One of the things is a story I'm going to add in here is that I mentioned, I think, on the seventh day of Matzot, we were having story time. We had story time. If you missed it, you missed story time. You should have been here for Matzot 7. It was pretty cool. And I mentioned that because this was shortly after Pesach. And that week, I was walking by my office, and these couple ladies were up at the front desk, and they called me over. I'm like, what's this about? Called me over, and I see she's got a printout where she's got a Seder plate printed out. She's looking at it and talking to the other lady. And they kind of knew about me, and they knew that I probably kept Sabbath and all this stuff, and so they came over to ask me about that. And we talked, chit-chatted a little bit about what some of the meaning of that was. And I kind of mentioned, part of the Passover that we have is the Afikomen thing. So I kind of explained to them the symbolism and the procedure for the Afikomen about, breaking it and you're burying it, you wrap it in, and then you hide it and you find it. I says, look, this is a picture of the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua right there in the Passover that Jews do, and they don't see this as a picture of Yeshua. And she was totally amazed by that. It's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. It's incredible. And I'm like, we got a bunch more of those. But I say people will come into Bat Zion, and they're amazed by these little stories. They're amazed by these connections they haven't heard before. But after about a year or two, you kind of heard all of them. And we've had people come in here with their baggage, learn these stories, and leave with their baggage. And I told her, I said this to her, and I didn't tell you this on that night. I says, that's all cool stuff, but it doesn't necessarily change a life. What I want to see is lives changed. And sometimes the change is fast. And that's great to see when a big change happens at one moment overnight. But frequently, growth is slow. And a story I had was that growing up down there in Clear Lake, we the boys of the house, so we would be in charge of mowing the grass because that was something we could do, so Dad put us to do that. And I don't know what it was. I don't think we planted this, but there's a little pine tree twig in our front yard. And it was in the middle of the grass. It wasn't like in a flower bed. And so we had to mow right up around it. And I don't think we planted there. I think it might have wanted a squirrel planted or something, right? It just grew, started growing, right? But we decided, we're not gonna mow it down. We want to keep it, right? We just keep mowing around this thing. And I remember one day I'm just mowing fast, and I made a turn. I almost mowed right over the thing, man. I had the lawnmower up in the air. I'm like, oh man, I almost mowed over that thing. And it grew a little bit while we were there until we left. But then I went off to college and moved off and never went back there for a long time. But a few years ago, we were heading down to the beach. And I said, let me show you my old house. So I swing by there. Oh, that tree. It's an enormous tree now. Right? Because I haven't been there in a long time. Right? All this growth was happening very slowly. And it's neat when you can look back over a long period of time and you can see a big growth. And kind of like that, but not exactly. I have this photo, an older photo, now about 17 years old photo here. I think I've showed this a couple years ago, and it's a little grainy. Baby, you took this photo, right? This is not my photo, right? You took it? I think that's me up there. You can't see me. Of course, there's a Christmas tree, which is irritating. But and so I'm pretty sure this was around Christmas or December or so of 2009. Because this is the old building on Northgate Crossing. This is the Northgate Crossing building. The building itself doesn't even exist anymore. Now, let's see who from the right side, who do I see over there?
That's Lynn.
Lynn.
That's Lynn.
Oh, the photo's not real clear. She has changed. Look at there.
Yeah.
She's as pretty as ever, but her hair is white, huh? Wow. Who's in the middle there? Huh?
Well, Lisa.
Well, that's Deanne there. Oh, yeah, Deanne. Oh, wow. Thanks. I didn't know that. Yeah, that's Deanne, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, then who's in the center?
Lisa.
Lisa. And, of course, this is Carol. She stopped by a few months ago, and she hasn't come
right
back.
across the street.
Yeah, she lives right away. Look at all the dark hair on each one of them. Wow, man.
Look at that hair on
Yeah.
Huh? Actually, yeah, it's not just dark hair, it's hair. Oh, wow, yeah, look at that. Right? Huh? So you can see the growth, huh? But some of these, yeah, you can't. They look very much the same. I thought that was cool. Huh? Is Steve Collins there?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that is Steve Collins. Well, there's Gerard, right? The big guy. And I think I might be in the center there. I think, was this when I joined Batzion or something? You had to take this photo. I have no idea why we took this photo. Pretty sure it was hers and not mine. But I might be in there somewhere. I'm either behind the camera or I'm in that group. You just can't see me. But I'm hiding. I like to hide. And so, all right, you can put that away. You can put that one away. I think just go to the last one or whatever. It should be done. I think that's the end of my slides. So part of seeing growth and change and discipleship, maybe, that we'd like to be more a part of and do more here at Batzion, we're going to have some men step up and do more drashes. Now, Lance has already done several, and we're going to kind of push him into doing a little bit more of a rotation with Lance. Will has done a couple, 2 or 3 over the years. But we're pushing him, and he's agreed, so we're going to step up and do more of that. Cole did one, and so he's going to do some more with us. And we've got a couple of guys that have never done one that we're going to call up to do some. One being Gary, who's not here today, and Tom. And both of those last 2 men have actually, we didn't push them into it. They talked to us about it, or talked to me anyway, about doing that. And so we've kind of been working with them over a period of time to do that. And so we're going to rotate those 5 men in between the other 3 of us. And so they'll be doing them infrequently. But that, I think, shows, again, shows some growth, let's say. And that's some of the growth that we're saying that we want to see more of. And we're happy to see that. And none of us here are paid speakers. None of us here are paid, even us who do the more regular drashes. But please be, I guess, a little patient and graceful for those new guys. Although some of them did really great jobs. I think all the ones that I've seen so far did great jobs. But also, let's praise Elohim for that spiritual growth in those men and here at Batzion. And with that, I will say Shabbat Shalom.